Sarah was a 28 years old woman living in the city. She had a good job as an accountant and lived in a nice apartment. Sarah was single and loved going out with her friends on the weekends. One Friday night, Sarah's friends dragged her out to a new club that had just opened up downtown. Sarah was having a good time drinking and dancing with her friends when a very handsome man approached her. His name was Marcus, and he was incredibly charming. Sarah was immediately drawn to his confidence and good looks. Marcus bought Sarah a drink and they spent the whole night talking and flirting shamelessly. At the end of the night, Marcus asked Sarah out on a date for the following evening. Sarah was excited and said yes immediately. She could hardly sleep that night, thinking about her date with extremely good looking Marcus. The next night, Marcus picked Sarah up in an expensive sports car. He took her to the fanciest restaurant in the city. Sarah had never been to a place so upscale before. Over their incredibly expensive meal, Marcus seemed to have an endless amount of money to spend. He ordered them a $1,000 bottle of wine without even flinching. Sarah was super impressed not only with Marcus's obvious wealth, but with how mature and intelligent he seemed. He talked about things like art, classic literature, and world history in a way that just captivated Sarah. She hung on his every word, mesmerized by this amazing man she had just met. After their magical dinner, Marcus took Sarah to an incredible jazz club. They listened to the live band play while sipping expensive cocktails. Sarah had never had such an extravagant romantic date before in her life. When Marcus leaned in to kiss her at the end of the night, she didn't hesitate at all. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Marcus's relationship moved extremely quickly. Marcus swept Sarah off her feet with luxurious gifts, trips, and undivided attention. Within a month, they had moved in together into Marcus's huge mansion on the edge of the city. Sarah had never seen a house so massive and lavishly decorated before. The place was filled with incredibly creepy occult artwork, statues, and random strange objects from around the world. When Sarah asked Marcus about them, he just dismissed it as an eccentric hobby. Sarah tried not to think too much about Marcus's odd decorating choices because he was the perfect boyfriend in every other way. Romantic dates and surprise vacations almost every month. He always had money to spend and seemed to adore doing whatever would make Sarah happy. The only strange thing was that Marcus didn't seem to have any kind of job, and he was always home during the day when Sarah left for work in the morning. When she asked him what he did for work, he was extremely vague and hard to get a real answer out of. Sarah didn't think too much about it because Marcus obviously had more than enough money. After 3 months of non-stop romantic bliss, Marcus started acting reclusive and paranoid. He became obsessed with performing bizarre rituals and ceremonies behind locked doors that Sarah wasn't allowed to see. He started getting extremely moody and angry for no apparent reason at all. One day, Sarah came home from work to find out that the mansion's huge living room had been turned into an enormous pentagram lined in black candles. There were piles of strange objects and horrifying symbols painted everywhere. Marcus was in the middle of it, chanting in a language Sarah couldn't understand, while bathed in an airy glow. When Marcus saw Sarah standing there, he flew into a terrifying rage. He screamed at her to get out and never come back. No matter how hurt Sarah begged to know what was going on, Marcus wouldn't give her an explanation. He just kept roaring at her until Sarah finally fled the mansion in terror. Sarah tried calling Marcus for days, but he never responded. After a week of being shut out, Sarah finally broke down and went to the police to have them check on Marcus at the mansion. When the police showed up, the entire place had been abandoned with no trace of Marcus at all. All his belongings were just gone without a trace. It was like he had vanished into thin air. Sarah was heartbroken and very shaken by the whole experience. She tried her best to move on with her life, but strange things started happening that made it difficult. There would be sacrificed animal corpses left on her doorstep, or she would see deranged symbols painted in blood on the sidewalk outside her apartment. Sarah started having terrible nightmares about Marcus and his occult rituals. In some of the dreams, she swore she could see Marcus towering over her, chanting in that strange language. Sarah began to fear for her life and what Marcus may have done to her without her knowledge. She bounced around from friend's apartment to hotel for weeks. But no matter where she went, the problems followed. Sarah was at her wits' end and didn't know what to do. She didn't want to go to the police again because they would think she was crazy. Then, one night, as Sarah was falling asleep, she was jolted awake by an overwhelming sense of dread. She looked up to see Marcus standing over her with a ceremonial dagger in his hand. He had resurfaced to finish whatever he had started with Sarah. Before Sarah could even scream, Marcus plunged the dagger into her stomach. But instead of blinding pain, Sarah felt nothing at all. She looked down and there was no wound or blood. Just Marcus seemingly worshipping her with the knife. Sarah realized in that moment that Marcus was not trying to kill her, but to sacrifice her in one of his ritualistic ceremonies. She stayed perfectly still, pretending to be under his spell as Marcus continued his deranged chanting and rituals around her flawless body. Finally, Marcus seemed to be reaching the climax of his strange ceremony. Just before he raised the dagger to attempt a real sacrifice of Sarah's life, Sarah made her move, summoning every ounce of strength she had. Sarah punched Marcus in the face as hard as she could. Marcus went down like a rock, completely stunned. Sarah leaped up and grabbed the dagger out of his hands. For good measure, she slammed her foot into his face, breaking his nose. She snatched up the phone and dialed 911 while holding the blade to Marcus's neck. Within minutes, the police had arrived and were hauling Marcus away in handcuffs. Sarah had survived his bizarre ritualistic sacrifice attempt. She told the officers everything about Marcus's strange occult rituals and possessions at the mansion. The police were able to connect Marcus to a string of disappearances and deaths related to ritualistic cult sacrifices in the area over the past few years. The evidence from his mansion was overwhelming. He had been a prolific serial killer who used ritual sacrifices as a cover for his murders. Marcus was swiftly convicted at his trial and sent to prison for life with no possibility of parole. Sarah was finally free of her terrifying ordeal with the ritual-obsessed killer. She spent the next few years trying to move on and rebuild her life through extensive therapy. While Sarah would never truly be able to erase the trauma she experienced, she found strength in her survival. She eventually met a nice, normal guy that she felt safe being with. Sarah made sure to take things much slower this time around so as to avoid another disastrous experience like she had with Marcus. After a few years of healing, Sarah began speaking out to raise awareness about ritual-based cults and serial killers that use them as a cover for their crimes. She didn't want any other innocent people to be taken advantage of or hurt by these types of psychopaths. Sarah's story of being manipulated and almost sacrificed by the serial killer Marcus served as a chilling warning to all. It showed how easily even the smartest people can be deceived by a calculating killer hiding behind a mask of charm and wealth. Through Sarah's experience was the stuff of nightmares, she turned it into a driving force for good. She helped ensure that no person would have to suffer what she went through because of a dangerously disturbed individual like Marcus again.
A royal mouth, juicy.